Hey everyone, welcome to the New Populist. I'm Dave Brown. If you're new to this channel, please like and subscribe. The topic today is what are the advantages that a communist or a totalitarian country has when it comes to propaganda and espionage. And this is an important topic because obviously of what we have seen now with our relationship with Russia and China. Now, in the United States and in Western countries, we often have this superior attitude that we do everything better, and that some of these countries are fledgling, and because they're communist countries, that they're by definition incapable or not as capable as us. Now, in general, that's true, except when it comes to the issue of espionage and propaganda. Now, what are some of the advantages that a communist country has over the United States in this issue, and why? Well, the first thing is, because we're an open society, we absorb a lot of people from other countries. Every year we accept tens of thousands of foreign students from all across the world. And not to pick on the Chinese, but we have a lot of Chinese students here. And eventually some of them stay here, they get jobs, and eventually get U.S. citizenship. But unfortunately, we have a lot of news stories where we have Chinese Americans who were born in China and came here as adults who got a job in the government, in a research facility at a university where they handle classified information, and they have sold that information back to China. I think one gentleman said that he was doing it in service of the fatherland. So because we are an open society and because we allow people to come to this country, they have, these countries can send people here. And it's not always that they sent them here with the intention or that they were specifically given a mission. I'm sure that actually happens, but when they come here, obviously their governments know about them, and they can approach them at a later date, say, hey, why don't you help out your homeland and give us a little information? I see you're working at this research facility in New Mexico, or you're working near the Pentagon. How about you just give us a little information and we'll take care of you. Deal with a service for the motherland, right? So that does happen, and unfortunately, it seems to happen a lot. There seems to be a story almost every day or every week about somebody being busted for doing just that. And conversely, we in the West have the opposite problem. We can't really penetrate into those communist countries. For example, say you're a white guy, you're born in Kentucky, you decide you have an interest in Chinese culture and language, so as an adult, you go to a university in China, you learn Mandarin. Can you, at some point, become a citizen of China and get a job in their Defense Department where you handle classified information? Is there any white guy that was born in America working in Chinese defense right now? I'm going to go ahead and, without doing any research, and guess the answer is no. So we in the West have an inability to penetrate into other countries, and they have this massive ability to penetrate into our own country. And this brings me to a book I read. It is called New Lies for Old, and it was written by, I hope I get his name right, Natalie Golitsyn. He was a former KGB agent in the Strategic Planning Department, and he defected decades ago while the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union. And the gist of this book and his lesson for American intelligence is we underestimate the level of propaganda that comes out of, at that time, the Soviet Union, and how they mislead Western analysts in understanding what they're trying to do. And oftentimes they will float out phony information, or they'll give us information because we in the West, we're always looking for a sign that there's a breakdown in a communist country, or there's a potential revolution brewing. And so they'll stoke those flames and sort of feed us what we want to hear in order to mislead us. And that was the So that's just the entire book, is that they are much more advanced in their propaganda and, more importantly, in their long-term planning. Again, another advantage they have as a communist country, because they have unity within in their party, being a one-party system, is that they can plan for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, or even longer. Whereas in the United States, we have a new president every 4 years, and all of a sudden, the geopolitical goals of our country can shift. And so we don't have that the same ability to have as much of that long-term planning that a China could have or a Soviet Union could have. Now, we are focused on both China and Russia. And unfortunately, because of Donald Trump and everything that happened the last 5 years, and when I say unfortunately, I don't mean the election, I mean this renewed effort and vigor to really go after Russia and treat them as the boogeyman. Now, Russia is far from perfect. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. He's a strong man. He's a dictator. He's not a good guy. But when I look at the potential threats of the Soviet Union Russia and China, I don't think Russia even is in the same category of where China is at now. Russia has been fairly stable in what it is for the last several years. Their economy, it's not shooting into the stratosphere. It's pretty static. They work to protect their political space. Of course, they're trying to influence Ukraine and some of those former Soviet satellite countries. And from their perspective, can you blame them? That's their sphere of influence. And of course, we have NATO, and we have this sort of Ukraine in the middle, where we're both sort of fighting back and forth through Ukraine as a proxy for power and control in that region. But I don't think Vladimir Putin has any plan to try to expand past Ukraine into Western Europe and take over Western Europe and make it, a renewed new Soviet Union. Whereas China, if they had the power to take over all of Southeast Asia, I don't doubt that they would. I think the only thing that's stopping them is really just time and gathering the resources in order to do so. I have no faith that they will just stay contained in China if they had the power to expand further. So China, in my view, is the much bigger threat. And I sort of touched on some of the differences between, where Russia is, but what are those distinct advantages that China has? And again, they have, this massive economic advantage that Russia doesn't have. And we see this every day with our interactions of our CEOs and our corporations and Hollywood and our politicians and China. The amount of influence that China has over the United States is amazing. For example, Hollywood has actually changed the plot of their movies, censored their movies in order to not offend China. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, we couldn't make enough movies about the Soviet Union and how they were terrible and how we were going to defeat them. There's a million movies that bashed the Soviet Union. So looking at the Soviet Union and China, they're being treated completely differently by our media and by our corporations and by our politicians. We look at Tim Cook. He had this agreement with China where I think it was worth over $300 billion so that Apple could have access to the Chinese markets. So there's this massive influence economically that China has over the United States that the Soviet Union never had. Another difference is that China has this ethnic solidarity. Russia or the Soviet Union was composed of several different nationalities. And there's always this want by the Russian elite, who actually, back in the 19th century, spoke French. They wanted to be more like Europe. And Russia was in this weird place where they sort of had one foot in Europe and one foot in Asia. And they were kind of looked at as the backwards, redheaded stepchild of Europe. Economically, in the 19th century, they were way behind Europe. They were a massive, large agrarian society spread out over this huge continent. And they sort of just wanted to be a lot more like Europe, and specifically the French. And so there's this want of Russia to just sort of be part of Europe, whereas China, with their ethnic solidarity, they don't want to be part of Southeast Asia as this community. They want to expand. They are ethnically rock solid, and there's no identity crisis for the Chinese. And the third thing is, the one advantage China has is that they get to learn from all of the mistakes that the Soviet Union made. And the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 80s. China, when the Soviet Union collapsed, was just taking off. And they have the advantage now to look and go, what did the Soviet Union do wrong? And how can we not repeat those mistakes? And clearly, from an economic standpoint, they've done a lot better. They have 388 billionaires, for example, in China. They are in a different stratosphere economically than Russia. So they went to work on mistakes that the Soviet Union made and are not repeating them themselves. And this brings me to another book written by Michael Pillsbury. It is called The 100-Year Marathon. And Michael Pillsbury is a China expert and has been for decades. He's worked in different administrations. He's not a political right-winger or a left-winger. He's more moderate. And the gist of this book is that we in the West have underestimated China's long-term strategic planning as far as what they want to do, which kind of goes back to the book that was written in the 70s, I mentioned earlier, Liu Ai's Role, which is about long-term strategic planning. And China's goals, according to Michael Pillsbury, and this shouldn't shock you, is to supplant the United States as the world superpower in this 100-year marathon to surpass us. And he himself acknowledged that he didn't quite grasp this until later, relatively later in his career. And he sort of had this epiphany and went, wow, I've been misled and just didn't quite grasp what they were trying to do. And now he's worried that we're too late in responding to this and to push back against China. And he actually gives a example of having two Chinese defectors, and this goes back to the idea of planting information that we learned about that with the Soviets. And one Chinese defector said, A, all these things are going to happen. And they had a second one that said, B, all these would happen. Now, the Western analysts wanted to believe A because it matched what they personally wanted for our relationship with China. And so they were more inclined to believe A. As it turned out, B was correct. And they didn't pay attention to that. And so China, in this 100-year marathon, they have a really unified effort to move forward. Now, there were at a time some members of the Communist Party who were more moderate. And according to Michael Pillsbury, this faction did not win out. They have been pushed to the back burner, and the hawks run China. They are unified in their goal to one day pass the United States. And at their current trajectory, that could happen in the next 10, 15, or 20 years. And he's trying to sound the alarm saying, hey, we have to wake up. We are way behind on understanding what China wants to do. We have fallen for their propaganda. We have been misled by their overtures of saying, oh, yes, we're going to be nice. We're going to become more democratic. And hey, don't worry, relax, open up your economy so we can get stronger and eventually one day pass you. And unfortunately, they've done a great job of that. And they are positioning themselves really well right now. And if we don't respond quickly, and we were under Trump, and he started that ball rolling, but if we don't continue it, one day I think we're going to look and go, wow, we are no longer number one, we are now number two. And for the rest of the world, as imperfect as the United States is, I guarantee you, you would rather have the United States be a world superpower. We have some accountability. Our government does have to answer to we the people in our democracy, as imperfect as it is. And yes, it is very, very imperfect. But at least there is some pushback. There is a quote unquote free press, although that's being sort of chiseled away. You do not want China in the driver's seat. I wouldn't put anything past China. They scare me. I don't think that they have any sort of limits on what they would do in order to maintain their power once they were to get there. So that's the warning to us. I used to have a lot of confidence in the CIA. Unfortunately, after seeing John Brennan be the director for as long as he was, I'm not 100% confident that they are the organization to really help to push back against China. Hopefully they wake up and we get better people in there, because we have very limited time to change our strategies and put up a good fight. So hopefully we do that. Well, that's it for now. I am also actually, real quick, the co-author of the book, Black and White, How the Left is Destroying the Dream of Martin Luther King and Our Founding Fathers. If you want a non-Black Lives Matter, non-Antifa viewpoint on race relations from the right, go ahead and pick up a copy. It's available on Amazon, and there will be a link in the description. Cheers. Have a good one.